Hello everyone, my name is Joe Cicero. I'm a Senior Program Manager on our Intune for Education partner team. That sits within engineering, but I also want you to know that I'm a former teacher. I taught social studies in New York before transitioning to Microsoft, where I get to help our customers and partners worldwide help schools adopt Intune for Education to, as the title suggests, conquer complexity, which we know is true. And I think I sort of look like the character on your screen, at least the video portion for sure, maybe the animated character. But let's start by talking about education. Whether you're an educator or you work in education or you've never worked in education, one thing that we need to be very clear about is that education is a unicorn. It's different, right? How we act in education from an IT perspective, from an infrastructure perspective, from a device management, from a wireless perspective, all of those things are unique to education. Granted, there's some overlap, but education is its own unicorn. And also interesting about this is the role of the employee in decision making. Oftentimes a company will say, hey, this is the technology we use. You employee, you go use it. And in this case with education, our employees, our teachers, our educators reaching our youth. And oftentimes they're not necessarily the victims of technology, but instead the proponents of technology, of what they need in their classroom. What are the tools, the apps, the updates and that they need, and also as important, what are the things that they don't need, right? Long login times, waiting for an update, right? Those things are things that the teachers don't need, and obviously things that the students don't need either. What we've also learned over the last couple of years is that schools have gone from lagging in technology adoption, right? Big company adopts the latest and greatest and then eventually gets to schools due to limited funding. But because of remote learning, we've seen a lot of schools really amplify their digital transformation and have it occur before even enterprise in many cases. And then the last part, IT departments are generally not staffed at the same ratio that we would see elsewhere. Like in a large corporation where they would have a large IT department. In schools, there is no such ratio. So in today's conversation, in today's presentation, thank you for tuning in, by the way. I want to walk us through a fictional character that I think a lot of us can relate to, and that's the IT director who, like the previous slide suggests, is understaffed, managing lots and lots of devices, and has some real struggles around device management, specifically managing Windows updates, making sure the security settings are what they need to be, making sure the students and staff have the apps that they need. Meanwhile, as Sam, our fictional character, struggles to try to make all of this work, and we know our IT folks out there work a lot to make sure that the environment in your school works as best as it can. But oftentimes we're not necessarily huge fans of the IT department because we might see them as a hurdle, a blocker in what we want to do with our students, what we want to do with our fellow teachers. So obviously, Sam is also the victim of receiving some of the complaints about how the environment is not as perfect as her customer, right? The end user, the staff and students would like. And why is that? That's because every single year more devices are purchased, right? Maybe it's a device refresh. Maybe devices broke. Maybe you got a grant and you're going to get more devices. But every summer, Sam's office looks like this. Tons and tons of devices are loaded up in the library, in the cafeteria. Maybe you rent some warehouse space depending on the size of your school. And all these devices come in from your reseller, whatever company you bought them from, and you have the joy, Sam has the joy of unboxing, making sure the devices turn on and getting them configured for the students, right? And this can be a significant delay. If they come in the summer and by September you're ready to deploy, well, maybe it's not a delay for the students, it's probably a delay for Sam, because Sam obviously doesn't just manage devices. There's all this other infrastructure and IT pieces, like a learning management system, identity, uh, you know, insert tons of things that she manages, but she's spending all of her time here. If it's during the school year, well, the laptops show up and the teachers are excited to use them. Maybe they went to some PD on some really cool things on how they can use them in their classroom with their students, but they have to get ready and configured, right? And what's Sam doing? Well, judging by the amount of devices piled up here, she's probably doing a lot of imaging, right? She's unboxing the devices. She's creating a gold image, the version of Windows with the apps on it, the policies on it that maybe her team over the years have come to designate the golden image, meaning that each one of these devices, even though they ship with Windows already installed with that on them and all of the drivers that they need, due to past practice, she is going to re-image every single one of these devices. And if you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, Sam is running out of the room. So let's take a look at some of the steps Sam's going to go through as she realizes that she owns it and it's going to make her life a lot easier. So why not? Before we look at those steps or thinking about those steps, we have to also see what Sam saw. And this is Intune for Education. Now, at Microsoft, we have Microsoft Endpoint Manager, formerly known as Intune. This is our cloud-based device management solution for the world, for enterprise. Now, some schools use it too, but it's mainly an enterprise-focused tool. And it's great. However, when we look at schools, when we look at folks like Sam who are already feeling the pressure of the IT management, of the time and all of the stuff that's required as part of that process, we thought we would design something very specific to folks like Sam, to those school IT directors, and that's what we're looking at right here. This is Intune for Education. We built Intune for Education specifically for schools to be able to quickly navigate and adopt cloud-based device management. Why? Faster login times, controlling Windows updates, switches on and off, all the things we talked about on the previous slide. We built Intune for Education to solve those issues. And as you look at it, it does look very education friendly. It looks, personally, like no other Microsoft product. And the benefit of Intune for Education is that if a customer owns Intune for Education as part of their Microsoft 365 license, they automatically own the bigger Microsoft Endpoint Management solution. So they own both. And if they make a setting in one, it automatically shows up in the other, and it allows our customers to right-size their IT solution for what they need. In fact, there's a chance that they might use a little bit of both. They might use Intune for Education for most of their day-to-day operations of setting some switches. I want to stop Windows updates. I want to push this. I want to push a home page. I want to push an app, but if they have to do something a little bit more complicated, maybe configure enterprise Wi-Fi 802.11x, we'll send them over to Microsoft Endpoint Manager and get that spot there to do those more complex tasks. So customers automatically, if you own one, automatically own the other, and the settings are going to sync up back and forth. The way I explain to people is Microsoft Endpoint Manager, MEM, has thousands of switches. Intune for Education has about 180. And if 180 switches to configure your environment sounds like still a bigger number than you're comfortable with, we have this button that you're staring at in the center of the screen called Express Configuration. When you launch Express Configuration, we limit down your buttons. I didn't count recently, but we'll say less than 20-ish buttons that you press, and we make some recommendations on what we think you as an education customer would likely configure on your own. Now, just because this is your express configuration doesn't mean that you are stuck with this like a golden image. You can go in and change any setting, right? That nothing in Intune for Education is permanent. Nothing about cloud-based device management is permanent. It's all about your ability to access the controls and change it to the environment as you need. So if we dig into Intune for Education, the next thing I want us to see is what it looks like to deploy an app. Now, growing up, to deploy Office, I had 20 diskettes and I had to insert each one into the computer, insert disk 5, 6, 7. It was a job. Then we got to CDs, and then obviously enterprises had more network-based solutions, but it's always been a process to deploy things like Office. However, if you're using Intune for Education, deploying Office is as simple as clicking the button to deploy Office. You can select your group, which is your Azure Active Directory group, your group of users, your group of devices. Select your group and then click the button to deploy Office, and that's going to push out Office to those devices. Now, at this point, oftentimes schools, customers will bring up, well, Office is huge. Like, there's so much greatness, so many accessibility features, so many new features all up inside of Office. That's a big file to push through the cloud to all of these devices in my ecosystem, right? We think about Sam and her 5,000 devices. If Office is, I don't know, we'll make up 500 megs, it's 500 megs times 5,000. That's a lot of network traffic, and it gets people a little bit concerned about whether or not their network can handle it. That's why we have something turned on called delivery optimization. Now, you can configure this in the settings button in Intune for Education, just staring at the screen that I'm presenting. You can click on settings and change that and turn it on or enable it. It's called delivery optimization. And what that means is when you or your device has a piece of software and another device needs that software, your device is going to share its bits and bytes with that other device, reducing the amount of external network traffic needed, right? Internal bandwidth is rarely an issue. It's always that external bandwidth that a lot of schools still struggle with. The way I like to describe it, probably as a former teacher, is just like how we like our students to collaborate during the school day. This is where our devices get to collaborate outside of the school day, because that's another important point. None of these updates or app deliveries, unless you specifically force them to install, right, you target them during the school day, they're going to install at the device's active hours. So whether it's sitting at home with the child if they take the device home in a one-to-one setting, or it's sitting in a cart, that device, so long as it's plugged in, turned on, and connected to the internet, it's going to log in, it's going to activate in the middle of the night, it's going to call to the cloud, and it's going to say, hey, is there any Windows updates for me? Is there any Microsoft Defender, any security updates? Do I need to do a security check? Is there any apps I need to install? Any apps updates? And depending on the settings that you select, it will restart itself and be fresh for the next day. Right now, you can delay when those updates occur. You can set that update window. But most importantly, we want to make sure that when a student is trying to learn, that their computer is focused on that student learning and not focused on an update they have to do or Office that needs to be installed. Right? But when we do need to deploy those apps, it is that simple click of a button. I want to deploy Office apps. We also have the ability to upload or to assign web apps, as well as MSI files. So if there's any MSI that you need to upload and deploy, we can deploy MSI files. We can deploy anything from the store as well. So all of those can be quickly deployed via Intune for Education. Many schools have some old legacy apps that are .exe. We don't allow you in Intune for Education to upload .exe apps, but what we do is allow you to do that inside of Microsoft Endpoint Manager, because there's a couple more steps. You have to wrap the exe as a different file type in order to push it out. But it's not a deal breaker if you as a school have a couple exes that you need to deploy. That works with our modern cloud-based management solution. We just don't make it visible in Intune for Education, and that's because we're very purposeful about what buttons and features we light up in Intune for Education. Because it's built alongside MEM, because they're writing to each other, we could have Intune for Education have 2,000 buttons, just like Microsoft Endpoint Manager does. The reason we don't is because of our target audience, and that's our schools, our IT directors, where we're trying to simplify management as much as possible, knowing that we have that complex solution available to them in Microsoft Endpoint Manager. Let's keep on moving forward. Here's an example of what the settings look like. So here we're looking at your Windows login settings, your Windows device settings. Can they log in with a personal account? Do you want to automatically complete the domain name, right? This is a big switch moving from on-prem to cloud-based device management. A student might log in today as, Jay Cicero and then their password. When you move to a cloud management solution, you're logging into your Azure Active Directory name, your cloud identity, and that looks very similar to an email address. Doesn't have to have email turned on, but it looks like an email address. So that would change to jcicero@myintunedemo.com. That's a lot to type if you're a little one or you're trying to limit the amount of time it takes to get into a class, get into learning. So you can automatically complete the preferred domain name. And that's just a quick example, but that's what all of these settings look like. Each one of these carrots pops out to explain all of the settings. You can hover over the information button and it'll tell you what it does. At the top, there's also a search box. So if you don't really know where it would be categorized, you could search for it. So you could search for Microsoft Defender, our security solution, and it would pop up the security, it would expand the security section and highlight all of the spots where that search term appeared. Shared devices is if you wanted to enable shared PC mode. That's the ability to have multiple people using the same device without the device getting slower over time or needing any re-imaging. We already talked a lot about updates and upgrades. This is your ability to tell the device when it should update, and that means delaying updates too. Maybe you want to not get the latest version of Windows. Maybe you want to delay it 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, whatever, 61 days. It's up to you to fully customize that. And so these are just a snapshot of what those settings look like for Windows devices. Something we haven't talked about yet is Intune for Education. So Microsoft Endpoint Manager manages, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, not Intune for Education, we'll get there. Microsoft Endpoint Manager manages Macs, Windows, iOS devices, Android devices. Maybe I'm missing one, right? Plethora that it manages. Intune for Education, we manage two platforms. We manage Windows, and that's Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 11 SE. Same experience, doesn't change the interface. Windows, right? Benefit of Windows 10 and all company ones, very simple. Manage Windows. And then we also manage iOS. Why do we manage iOS? Why do we choose to elevate that versus others? And that's because we see a lot of schools have iPads. And a lot of schools are used to cloud-based device management with their iPads, right? They're used to MDM management of iPads. And because iOS, just like Windows, publishes switches that we as a cloud solution, a cloud management provider can go in and turn things on and off, we have the ability, working with Apple, to see those knobs and switches, and we illuminate them. We make them available inside of Intune for Education. This has been such a huge help to our schools because our schools, like Sam, own, most of them, Microsoft 365 and therefore own Intune for Education. But they're also paying for another MDM provider specifically for their iPads, right? So if you boil it down, they're looking at two different solutions, right? You have your iPad management and then you have your Microsoft licensing, which includes Windows management. Wouldn't it be great if you could manage both in one place? And that's why we have the iOS buttons enabled here. So it's not just settings. You can deploy apps from your app stores. So your app tokens, configuring all of that stuff that you would in a third-party MDM provider. You can now do that in Microsoft. And if you're tuning in today and you have iPads and you have Microsoft 365 A3, then you're paying for twice the solution. And I think it makes a lot of sense to look here. And we see a lot of customers will look here first because they're very comfortable with these settings. These look identical to elsewhere because they're the buttons that, or they look similar to elsewhere because they're the buttons that the iOS, the Apple OS folks publish. So a lot of schools will feel comfortable in this space and then say, oh, well, I can do this with Windows too. That's fantastic. Let's keep on going. So Sam gets this demo and she sees it, and just like you're seeing it, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I like that. Cloud buttons, on off switches, sounds good. How do I get my devices there? Right? We talked, I'm explaining it as if the devices are already enrolled, but they need to be enrolled to get into cloud-based device management, right? There's some prerequisites for this all to work. Number one, you got to have cloud identity. You have to have Azure Active Directory. You have to have a username that looks like an email address, right? Because users need to be able to log into these cloud-based devices. On top, once you have that, you have to make sure that the devices themselves are joined to the cloud. So the device is joined to Azure Active Directory so that Intune can manage them. And there's a couple ways to get them in there. We're going to cover two ways. The first is called a provisioning package. So what we do here, and what Sam does, is she's going to create a USB stick using an app that we have. It's called Set Up School PCs. Guess what you use the app for? To set up school PCs. It's a fantastic name, very specific to what it actually does. The app walks you through creating a bulk token that is going to sit on that USB key and turn that USB key into a physical key so that when you put it into the side of a brand new Windows device, think of brand new Windows device, you bring it out of the package, you open it up, it makes some fancy sound, there's a screen that loads. When it's at that point, you insert this USB stick into the side of the device for 15 seconds or so, and the device is going to kick over and start enrolling itself. You can pull the USB stick out at that point and go to your next device. What's on that USB that makes it a key? Well, the first thing is its wireless connectivity. It tells the brand new Windows device how to connect to the internet, because if you can't connect to the internet, how are you supposed to be cloud managed? Step number one, connect to the internet. Step number two, join Azure Active Directory. Well, how does it know to do this? As part of the process, you sign up or you sign in with your Azure Active Directory account, which creates that token. And the third thing is apply any policies and get you managed by Intune. So 15 seconds or less to deliver that payload of instructions. Pull it out, go to your next device, and then while you're working on that next device, the first device or the previous device is going to be calling up to Intune, Azure Active Directory, calling to Intune for education, and seeing what apps it has to get. Like, oh, I should install Office, I should do this, oh, I need these policies assigned. But you've already moved on to your 10th or 15th device at this point. My personal record is about 300 devices in 3 hours. So 100 devices per hour is what I can do with one USB stick. But we have deployed tens of thousands of devices at a time using this method with provisioning packages. That's a Set Up School PCs app with a USB stick that you configure and then go and put it in all of your brand new devices. For Sam, she's able to enroll 30 PCs into Intune for Education in under an hour. Perfect to pilot it out. Maybe Sam's starting in a new environment, right? We're going to test it out, make sure everything works. Set up school PCs using the provisioning package is her best way to get in and start trying it out, because she already owns it and she's excited about it. And now she has some of her own devices that she can push policies and apps to. But it's not just about Sam being excited. What does it actually mean for her teachers and students? Oftentimes when we think of teachers and students, we think about what they're learning, their curriculum, the content that they're accessing, and not really about the infrastructure. But obviously, as I've called out numerous times early on, like, the infrastructure matters. It's the ability to log in. It's the ability to have the environment that you need when you need it. So how do staff and students react to Sam's pilot, right? She puts them in a classroom. Here, kids, log in. You're logging in with this, what looks like an email address and your password. Well, what do the kids notice? They notice that their devices aren't updating during class time. When they log in, it's not telling them that there's important updates for them to do. They're realizing that if it's a one-to-one device, like, the login is super fast. If it's a shared PC, if you've had this experience, a legacy managed shared PC, because of the numerous people that are using it, gets slower, and because it has to build a new user profile every time, that means that it takes multiple minutes and minutes to log in. When shared PC mode is turned on, less than 30 seconds to log in. I don't want to get too technical in why that is, but I know some of you listening will appreciate that. And then less time spent at the help desk, right? No longer need to re-image devices or figure out why something doesn't work or why an app's not there or why it doesn't have an update. Cloud managed means that as long as the device is waking up and checking in, it has the latest and greatest based on Sam's team's policy and what they've done. And this changes the conversation of what you as a school are focused on. It becomes less about the device and more about what you use on the device, right? So it becomes more about, all right, we can log in now. I'm going to use tech in my classroom a lot more because it's a lot quicker, it's a lot more reliable. I'm going to try out this Microsoft Teams stuff. I'm going to create some assignments here. I'm going to have my younger students try out reading progress. Ooh, I'm going to have my science class use OneNote and create some notebooks for their lab reports. It transitions the conversation because it's less about there's less time spent figuring out why the tech doesn't work and more time spent on tech enablement. What can you do now as a result of having fast, reliable, and accessible technology? And ultimately, what does that underscore? It becomes more time learning. So how do we scale this? How do we go from the 30 devices Sam piloted to 5,000? Right? Now, I told you you can use provisioning packages for tens of thousands. Millions of devices have been deployed with provisioning packages. But what if you don't want to touch every single device? We have a solution called Autopilot. Now, you as a customer can set up Autopilot. It's a little bit more complicated for you as a customer because you do need to touch each device to get the information. A better solution is to actually work with your partner. When you're buying new devices, ask the partner to register them in Autopilot for you. Either the partner can do it or the OEM. So if you're buying like an HP, Lenovo, Acer, Surface, like those folks can also register the devices for you. And what that means is when the device comes to you, it's already owned by you. It's already registered to Azure Active Directory, meaning that when you get the device, you just need to connect it to the internet, and depending on how you have Autopilot configured, it might just automatically enroll itself, right? Great stories of remote learning where laptops were sent directly to students' houses and students just had to connect it to the internet and log in with their school account, and voila, it had all the school's apps, all the school policies already applied. Now, Sam, at this point, even though she started off a little skeptical, is less skeptical now because, again, just like how she managed other devices before in the cloud, she's realizing that this Autopilot thing looks very similar to how she's also deployed other devices, right? So Sam, in an attempt to get all of her 5,000 devices, think back to 10 slides previous of the library, the gymnasium, the configuration center, if a school's so lucky, piled with boxes. She wants to get these devices out the door as quickly as possible so that she can focus on other things, but also so that her students can actually use the technology that they've purchased, right? Technology is only good if people are using it. It doesn't do any good if it's sitting in boxes or sitting in a library or the corner of a library. So Sam does this. She works with her partner to enroll devices, and she's feeling pretty confident with herself. So her devices are deployed at record time. Sam and her small team are now unstoppable. And her staff and students are now using Microsoft 365 daily. They're getting the full suite of what the school owns, right? So that means that they're doing some neat stuff in PowerPoint. They're using Teams. They're using OneNote. All of the things that IT directors like Sam have worked so hard to enable on the device, but haven't been used just due to access or not having the right version, all of that is now set up and configured. So Sam purchases another set of devices because scaling is less of an issue for her now that she's moved things to the cloud. Another thing I want to call out very quickly is, what does it mean once everyone is using Teams and OneNote and Sam has a new problem, which is how do you make sure that Teams and OneNotes are automatically created for every single student? We have a program for that. It's called School Data Sync. sds.microsoft.com connects your student information system to Azure Active Directory, which configures all of the groups so that your classes are pre-built or synced over, and you can then target Intune for education policies, as well as automatically create teams in OneNote based on that. So I wanted to give a plug for that because this gets us to that even more automation of school data sync, automatically creating users, groups, Intune for education, managing those devices, managing that user experience, and ultimately taking Sam from a sad state to a happy state by using the technology that she already owns and just helping drive her her readiness and ability to act and transform. And by you folks, you tuning into this presentation, my hope is that you feel empowered to go and see what you own with your Microsoft 365 license. Are you using it? And are you willing to make the change if it means that your life will be better? I know personally I want to be happy, Sam. I want to float and have a beautiful, majestic background. And so I clearly would choose that path, and I encourage you to do so as well. My name is Joe Cicero. Thank you so much for listening to this recording. Feel free to reach out, and I'd love to hear your story. Thank you.